phones and backup, and basically it's their office.
C-SPAN's Election 92 coverage continues.
George W. Bush, how do you see the 92 election at this point?
Bush.
Any doubt in your mind whatsoever?
Not really, Brian. I know we've had a pretty tough month. Bill Clinton had, I guess, what was a good convention. Very little second guessing, at least in the national media. And as a result, for 4 consecutive weeks, there's been I guess, kind of a love affair with the fella. But now it's George Bush's turn to say what he believes in and where he's going to take the country. And I know my dad pretty darn well, and I know it's going to be a strong, positive message by a good, caring man, and people listen to it. So I'm very confident.
I don't know if you've seen this thing. Maureen Dowd on the front page of the New York Times this morning has a piece, and the headline is "Weary and Feeling the Presidency's Weight." Have you seen that yet?
No, I haven't. I don't read the New York Times very much. As you know, I live in Texas, and I spare myself of that. But if the implication is George Bush is not ready to run for the presidency, Maureen Dowd and the New York Times missed it again. He's ready to go. He is a tough competitor. I've seen it in his eyes, and for those who don't think he's got the energy and the desire to campaign hard for presidency have once again underestimated my good dad. So.
Well, let me read a little bit of it so you can answer it on a national basis.
Okay.
She says, the Peter Pan president, who seemed to grow younger and bouncier during the first years of his administration, has faced health problems and staff problems and political problems, and he has finally felt the weight of the office he once wore so lightly.
She's wrong.
Explain why you know she's wrong.
Well, because I've been by George Bush's side. I've eaten dinner with him. I've talked to him. I know how intent he is upon getting reelected and governing for 4 more years. And this is a New York Times writer who's guessed about how he feels, didn't ask him, and so I can see it in his eyes. I know the man very well, and so and we'll see. Come this convention, I think the American people will see a fighter, someone who is willing to defend a cause and a principle that is eminently fair for the working people of this country.
You know, in the last couple of months, you can't pick up a newspaper every couple of days, or not necessarily every couple of days, but your name comes up all the time. And it goes something like this. George W. Bush snuck into town last week, was in the White House, meeting with people, reconfiguring the White House staff. How much of that's true?
Oh, I think people give me a lot more credit than I deserve. I have been in Washington quite a bit, but that's to be just a loyal soldier. I'm a foot soldier for George Bush, and people ascribe all sorts of power, and it's only because, Brian, I've got direct access to the president. And if you have access to the president, people automatically assume that you're a very powerful fella. And but George Bush doesn't need his son telling him how to govern or what to do. Believe me, he is the most experienced, most knowledgeable, most professional political person in our circle. And he does like feedback. He likes to hear from what the folks are thinking out in Dallas, Texas, or in Arlington, Texas, or at Ranger Stadium. But he's got a pretty good handle on where he wants to take his campaign and who he wanted to run it. And so all the stories ascribing unbelievable power to me really aren't true.
You're at the Houstonian Hotel?
Yes, sir.
There have been some stories about that in the last couple of days.
Really? Well, like what?
Well, Gary Trudeau had a piece in the Doonesbury. I'm sure you have some strong opinions about
No,
Mr.
I don't read Doonesbury.
How come?
Because he's the most prejudiced cartoonist I've ever seen. He's got a personal vendetta against George Bush, and so I really don't. I think he's guy's totally irrelevant, frankly.
Well, he had a piece that's he had a little drawing that showed a little plot of land that your father owns, and he suggests that it's all being done for tax purposes, and that he's really evading taxes.
Yeah.
What do you say about that?
I say Gary Trudeau's full of it.
What was your reaction when a bunch of conservatives called for your father to step down, including George Will? We talked about George Will the last time he appeared.
I think George Will's irrelevant to what George Bush thinks. The fact that George Will thinks George Bush ought to step down tells me nothing. And the other fella, direct mail artist guy, telling him to step down, he's irrelevant too. What matters is what the people think. The people who work for a living, the people who live out in the States, not the Beltway social gossipers, Brian, and you know that. And George Bush doesn't listen to those people. He listens to the people of America who pay taxes and who work. And those are the only ones that we try to pay attention to. So whether it be the cartoonists or the columnists or the second guessers or the people trying to make money off of politics, they don't matter to us.
You may not be able to see this. I'm holding up the Houston Post, and the headline is, "It's Clinton by 17% in the Texas poll."
Right.
What's the politics of a Houston Post, and what about this poll?
Well, I think the Post is reporting an accurate statement that we're behind in Texas right now. But if you hold up the November 5th or whenever it's going to be Houston Post, it's going to say Bush wins Texas, as well as the country. We've been down 17 points before in our home state, and have battled back. But let's hold up the polls come September 1st and to get a real good sense of where this campaign is in Texas. But we'll carry Texas, and I feel very comfortable about that, Brian.
What's your strategy the next couple of days? Will you be standing behind your mother when she gives her speech?
I don't know if she wants me back there or not. I haven't been told where to stand. My strategy is to smile, say nice things about my dad, and defend his record, talk about the future, and prepare myself to be a warrior for 81 days.
And what are you going to do over the next 81 days?
Well, I'm going to campaign hard in Texas, for starters, to make sure this key electoral state remains in Bush column, and spend some time in Washington and go to the electoral states that ultimately will matter in the final outcome.
What is your best political scientist's judgment as to why your father's polls are down at the moment?
Anti-incumbency. I think the Perot phenomena really did speak to, there's a sentiment out there that people are kind of tired of Washington, D.C., and it's much easier to blame George Bush than it is 435 congressmen. I think there's a little bit of economic gloom still in the news, although that's going to change as the fall comes around. I think the fact that he hadn't defended himself, he's been a president and not a candidate, but the defense starts tomorrow. And there's going to be a lot of voices singing George Bush's praise, and a lot of voices, Brian, contrasting politics of gloom, which is what Bill Clinton and Al Gore are all about, versus politics of hope, which is what George Bush and Dan Quayle is going to be about. So it's a combination of things. But remember, in 1988, we were down 17 points, same as the Houston Post headline, to Michael Dukakis, and won rather handily. And I don't know whether we'll win handily or not, but I really feel confident we'll win.
You know, if you talk privately to people, and even some publicly, both sides of the political fence, the Democrats and Republicans, they all talk about this Perot factor as being anywhere from 3% if he doesn't do anything to 9% if he gets active.
Yes.
Are you afraid of the Perot factor?
Well, I think some states he hurts us, some states he doesn't. I know in my neighborhood there in North Dallas, I would say that Ross Perot probably takes more votes away from George Bush. But when you go into Democrat strongholds where he's running pretty well, obviously he's taken away from Bill Clinton. So it's a mixed bag, and it's very hard to tell. But he's going to have to stay in the news and stay active and run a campaign to keep people's attention. And right now he's pretty well faded from the limelight, it seems to me.
Have you made any attempt to talk to either Ross Perot or Tom Luce on your own?
I spoke to Tom quite a bit. Tom's a friend of mine, and just made sure that Tom understood he was welcome back to the Republican Party, and that my family and myself understood full well why he was with Ross Perot. After all, they're great friends, and that we're still buddies. And I think Tom, hopefully when the time comes, will come and help Dad. I can't speak for him, though, and he's going to have to make that determination himself.
How are you all friends?
Tom and I?
Yeah.
We're good friends. Oh, just through Dallas and politics, and he's a Ranger fan in spite of the fact we're in 4th place.
Also, I lost my train of thought. I wanted to ask you about, Ed Rollins, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about this earlier in the program. I heard a report coming in on the radio that Ed Rollins may come back.
Yeah, unbelievable if he does. I don't know. I'm not involved in any of that.
What do you think of that idea?
Oh, I think you pretty much want to stick with the loyal soldiers. And, you know, guys that bounce around from campaign to campaign, frankly, make me a little nervous. But as you know, Brian, I am the ultimate loyalist. And I bleed George Bush blood. I have no other agenda but to see that he's elected President of the United States. And so I get a little nervous when people kind of hop around and badmouth the old man when things are bad and kind of for him when times are good. And I like to see people, soldiers that are willing to stay by our man regardless of good or bad times. So a fellow like Ed Rollins, frankly, would make me a little nervous.
But you know, on the Ross Perot front, remember that we kept reading that the reason that Ross Perot went after this thing in the first place was because he had a thing for your dad based on his relationship with him over the MIA POW thing.
Yeah.
Did Tom Luce explain it to you?
No, I really didn't ask Tom about Mr. Perot's motivations. I suspect that the reason he was running is he sensed this wave of discontent and has got the type of personality that was able to capture the imagination of a lot of those people who are discontented. But what I say to those people is that just wait and hear what George Bush says. I know there's a lot of small business people out there worried about government and worried about the economy, and I think you'll see George Bush address that subject. And on the other hand, if the small business people pays attention to what Bill Clinton says, they will realize that Bill Clinton's going to tax them out of existence. I mean, flat, run them out of business when he imposes his health care tax on them. So those are the kind of contrasts we're going to have to make over the next 80 days, Brian. And when I think people listen to what's on George Bush's mind and in his heart versus the philosophy of the other people, Ross Perot-type voters will come back to George Bush.
Go to January the 20th and assume for talking purposes that your father wins again and he's in a new term and you've got a Democratic Congress again, just for talking purposes.
Sure.
What can he do differently in the next 4 years that he wasn't able to do in the last 4?
Well, he can, one, bring in the 122 members of Congress, or whatever the number is going to be. Republican or Democrat, forget it. They're going to be reform-minded people and say, look, I've been reelected on reform, you've been elected on reform, let's get together and make sure we reform this government. And you'll see the campaign rhetoric begin to escalate on reform of government. And a lot of these people running for Congress, regardless of their party, are going to be reformists because that's the mood of the country. And I think what he'll do is capture the new Congress, the huge turnover that's in place, and convince them to adopt a reform package.
What do you think of Jim Baker coming back?
I think it's great. I think that Jim Baker has been one of my dad's best friends. He's been his best political ally. Every campaign George Bush has ever run, with the exception of the 1964 senatorial race here in Texas, Jim Baker's been at his side. And I think it's just wonderful that his best buddies by his side again at White House and the campaign are all elated with the change. And it's, I think it really matters.
But again, if he wins, then what does Jim Baker do? And if you expect him to leave the White House again, you need another chief of staff?
I don't know, Brian. I suspect that Jim Baker will do whatever he wants to do if he wins again.
But what would you advise your dad to tell the American people about what he would do in running the White House and the government once he were reelected?
What Jim Baker would do, or what Dad would do?
No, just basically what your father would do.
Oh, I think what he's going to do is, I think he's going to help reform the executive branch and help reform, cause the focus to attention on reforming Congress. I think he's going to have an economic revitalization for small business, hopefully regulatory relief, all the good, solid economic principles that allow for job growth. And I think that's what he's going to do. I also hope that he changes the cabinet and bring in some fresh blood.
Last time we talked, you said you might run for governor in this state.
No, I think you said I might run for governor.
I don't think I said that. Okay. I think I asked you that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you still thinking about it?
Not really. I'm focused on George Bush and the pennant. And right now, I got to tell you that George Bush's election looks a little better than the pennant, believe it or not. We're struggling for the Texas Rangers.
What's wrong with the Rangers?
I guess management, ownership. No, I don't know. We're not hitting the ball. Our stars, frankly, just didn't have good years. Julio Franco was hurt. Ruben Sierra drove in 8 RBIs in July, and Rafi Palmeira has hit in 260. And last year, those 3 guys were 3, 4, and 5 in hits in the American League. And when you take that kind of offensive firepower out of the middle of your lineup, it's really hard to compete in a tough division. So.
How do you keep both these balls in the air? Both the Texas Rangers and your father's reelection?
You just, I don't know, have a good mother, I guess.
George W. Bush, thank you very much for joining us.
Brian, always a pleasure.
We're going now to the Free Congress Foundation, a political action committee meeting shot yesterday with Paul Weyrich.